Well, welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, as Emerson, Lake and Palmer once put it. You're with Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is Elevenses, my twice weekly webcast, back after the break from New Zealand. So it's show number 317. It's Sunday, the 19th of March. And what have I got for you in today's show? We have a story about the DVSA failing to answer 94% of calls. The police have caught a Catch Me If You Can rider. A new blood bike is set to go into service for York Hospital. Bali plans to ban bike rental for tourists. Norton, on the other hand, are happy to bring a bike to you for test rides. MotoCAP have launched a new guide on how to build bike protective kit, and it's also free to all bike manufacturers. Yamaha are starting to use what's called green aluminium in their bikes, and the first car has appeared using a sodium battery, something I did talk about some weeks ago. Now, the Northern Irish road racing season has also been saved by crowdfunding, which is some great news. And then finally, today's discussion point, I'll talk about Shiny Side Up and ask, could it work in the UK? So settle yourselves down, grab yourselves a cuppa and a biscuit, and stay tuned for the next probably about 40 minutes. Actually, it's a slightly longer show than normal today. So, right, what have I got to talk about? First of all, well, that's it for Shiny Side Up out in New Zealand, the 2023 events. I'm now back in the UK. Now, it's not been a month of events without some difficulties, as if you've been following me regularly, you'll probably know. Now, I did get a fairly late invitation to participate, largely, I think, because New Zealand was actually somewhat behind us in dealing with COVID. They went into lockdown rather later because it didn't get there quite as early as it did here, and then they sort of stayed locked down rather longer than we did in the UK. So I think the organisers really were sort of up against it to get the tour organised in the first place. And so my invite to participate was a bit of a rush job. And thanks to a prior engagement with an IEM group up in Manchester, I missed the first live event down in Invercargill. I actually delivered my talk from Zoom here in London, and then turned around and immediately made the flight out to New Zealand. So that's pretty much where the problems started. Now, we landed just hours before Cyclone Gabrielle hit the north of the country. We were actually told that we might be diverted. Our onward flight to Queenstown for the second event, where I would have appeared in person, was actually cancelled, and then Judy and I got stuck in Auckland for 4 days. Just to rub salt into the wound. I also went down with food poisoning whilst I was there, probably the BLT I picked up in an airport cafe in San Francisco. And so I missed the Queenstown event, not just in person because I couldn't get there, but also on Zoom because I wasn't feeling particularly well. Now, I did recover enough to deliver the Nelson talk on Zoom. By that time, we'd picked up a hire car and managed to get down to the Wellington area. So I was just literally 100 miles or so away from where I should have been, but on the other side of the Cook Strait. And I finally managed to get to participate in the big day-long bike show. That was the event at Kapiti in Wellington. That was my first in-person appearance. Sadly, the next two events in Napier and Gisborne, the two evening talk shows, they were both cancelled due to the conditions up in North Cape following the cyclone. But we did manage to round off the tour with the 5 remaining events, or 4 remaining events, I should say. Wanganui, Rotorua, Auckland, and finally Whangarei. All in short order. So there's quite a lot of travelling and talking and travelling and talking, travelling and talking. And then it was onto the plane to embark on the first of the homeward legs of the journey. And that was to Sydney, from where I took a side flight to Professor Chris Horan's lab. I really must remember he has been promoted. Now, more on that in the next show. So what else? Well, Having got home, I have finally fixed the No Surprise, No Accident website, got that back up and running. Now, what happened here was a couple of months ago, I attempted to move the old .org.uk website to a new host. Now, I don't know what went wrong, but suffice to say, the old host transferred it out, but the new host, for some reason, never got it. And that left me in limbo because I couldn't actually access the site at all. And I couldn't renew the domain either, so that expired. And then it was initially frozen. Now, what I planned to do was re-register it when the domain was released again, but unfortunately a domain squatter got there first while I was out in New Zealand, and as I'm not about to fork out lots of my own cash to purchase it back again, I've re-registered No Surprise No Accident to a new address, and that is nosurprise.org. So very similar. A search hopefully will come up with it, but do check your links if you do have links anywhere to that site, and if you could update them, please, I'd be most grateful. Now, it will take me a few days probably to access all the places. I do have the old link in my own work, but I will try and do that over the next few days. Now, I do plan to actually put quite a lot more work into No Surprise issue. It's sat in limbo a bit for several years. So if you do have links to that, or if you haven't seen it before, do pop over there and take a look. It's an entirely new way of thinking about motorcycle safety. Now, I'm also taking bookings back here. I'm back here in the UK for training, so drop me a line if you're interested in a course. It doesn't talk down to you, and I would say offers genuinely practical advice for staying in one piece on today's roads. And finally, I just want to bring in the next two live webcasts. The April live event that was postponed from March is pre-preparation, pre-performance preparation and getting ready to ride. Now, this is rider psychology. It's based firmly on what's already in the domain of sports psychology. Just takes what's already known, applies it to motorcycling. Now, I know some people were looking forward to that. So hopefully it won't be too late on in the spring when it goes out on Wednesday the 5th at 8 p.m. And if you want to look further ahead, then May's event, which is postponed from April, is the full Science of Being Seen presentation. And those can be booked via the link I've just put up. So before I go on with the news, let's just say good morning to a few people. Kevin's here, Sue's here, and Kevin is also here. So two Kevins this morning to join me, also Kevin. We're a bit Kevin heavy, aren't we? We need a few other names here. Right, okay, so on with the news. Now, the first story I have for you today is from the Cross-Party Public Accounts Committee, and they have called the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency, the DVLA, their system to process applications slow, inefficient, and in need of major improvement. The report by MPs found that 3 million people have experienced driving licence delays since April 2020, with consequences including being unable to start or return to work and loss of income. Some people even lost jobs, and drivers with medical conditions were apparently the worst affected. As part of the problem, around 60 million phone calls, that's no less than 94% of the total, went unanswered during the 2 years between April 2020 and March 2022. And complaints about the DVSA received through MPs increased tenfold during the period 2019-20 and 21-22. The chair of the committee, who is the Labour MP Dame Meg Hillier, she said, quote, "The pandemic inevitably made operations more difficult, but the DVLA and the DFT were not prepared for the challenge of keeping essential driving licence services running, and especially not for those who needed it most. Some of the DVLA's operations are antiquated, it lacks a comprehensive strategy for modernisation, and we're unconvinced they are more ready for the next crisis. When that does arise, it will again be the most vulnerable customers, people for whom driving is a lifeline, who are worst hit. That's just not acceptable. The DVLA has to get its act together." Well, not too surprisingly, the DVLA, they had a very different view of things. As their spokesperson said, we are back to normal processing times across our services. All standard paper applications were back to normal turnaround times by May 2022. Our online services worked well throughout the pandemic, and for the vast majority of customers, their dealings with the DVLA would have been trouble-free. 98% of people who applied online received their driving license within just a few days. During the pandemic, we issued more than 24 million driving licenses, the vast majority of which were issued within 3 working days. Well, I have to say, it doesn't exactly match up with the 60 million phone calls, which is almost one per person who lives in the country, including those, of course, who are too young to drive, does it? So I tend to veer towards the experience of the Parliamentary Advisory Committee there. Right, okay, so Paul has also looked in and said good morning. Hi, Paul, good to see you here. Now, I mentioned a few shows back that a rider with spoof Catch Me number plate was indeed stopped by police, and now another biker has actually been caught after he was seen riding with a helmet logo reading "Catch Me If You Can." It took 5 miles, but they got him in the end. So the pursuit actually followed a robbery in which a teenager was seriously assaulted in Nuneaton in Warwickshire. The rider actually ditched the bike, which turned out to have been stolen in September last year, and he was apprehended whilst attempting to make off on foot. A spokesman for Warwickshire Police said, "It turns out that we can and did catch the rider of this motorcycle." So I have to say, red rag to a bull springs to mind there, doesn't it? Now, a rather more sensible use for a motorcycle is the blood bike, and a new blood bike has in fact been made available to York Hospital. And the emergency voluntary blood bike charity, White Knights Yorkshire Blood Bikes, they're actually appealing for volunteer riders to come forward and help the scheme. Now, members of the Pocklington-based Widows' Sons Masonic Biker Group, they were said to be instrumental in raising almost £20,000 to provide the voluntary blood bike service with a new bike for the area, which is covered by York and Scarborough NHS Foundation Trust. Now, the bike was welcomed into service by representatives of the motorcycle's donors, plus staff from the transfusion room of the city's hospitals. And it will be used in 24-hour shifts over weekends. Now, the existing machine had apparently been so busy during the COVID-19 pandemic that it actually needed replacing. The senior pharmacy technician at York Hospital, Kat Reed, said, "We only call White Knights when the medications and controlled drugs require urgent deliveries. We know they are all volunteers, and so we treat the blood bike service with the respect and the value it deserves. You do a brilliant job." So hats off to all blood bikers. I did do the job myself for a few years, and yeah, it's pretty rewarding to do, I must admit, even if you do have to get up quite often in the middle of the night in poor weather conditions too. Right, so just a couple of reminders. Don't forget you are tuned to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this show is now back to normal, going out live at 11 o'clock UK time. So I hope to see you on Wednesday for the next show, and then Sunday will be the show after that. Now, a place where bikes are also used widely is Bali, where they help riders navigate the island's narrow and scenic alleys. But whilst they're avoiding traffic congestion, they also cause a number of accidents. And one of the big problems is apparently the use of motorbikes by tourists. I have to admit to knowing someone who, having been told not to hire a bike while she was in Bali, and certainly not to ride it without wearing proper clothing, promptly did that. She had no experience of riding a scooter, but she hired one anyway, promptly fell off and needed a skin graft on the damage that she'd done to herself. But the problem extends wider than that. There are a large number of traffic violations and irresponsible behaviour. So the governor, Wayan Costa, he's announced plans to actually ban tourists from using rented motorbikes on the island altogether. Now, the scale of the problem, according to police records, is that over 170 foreign nationals were caught violating traffic rules in the short period from late February to early March, so presumably just a couple of weeks. Some were even caught using false number plates, which is quite amazing, really. Bali is part of Indonesia. It's a popular tourist destination. Tourism does play a significant role in Bali's economy, but there are increasing concerns about the environmental impact of tourism, with environmental degradation, overdevelopment, displacement of local communities. It's all become a growing concern for the locals. So balancing tourism with sustainable practices and community development is an ongoing challenge. Now, the governor noted that the island is currently being tidied up in preparation for the return of tourists who have apparently not been present due to COVID-19 restrictions. The ban is set to be implemented through a regional law later this year, but how it will be enforced remains to be seen. Okay, so what else have I got to remind you about? Don't forget, if you do want to catch up with Elevenses, it goes out live, obviously, but you can find it over on YouTube on my Survival Skills channel, Survival Skills UK over there. Don't forget the all important UK, or you won't find Elevenses. They're all over there, and if you do miss it live, that's probably the easiest place to go to catch up. Now, if you like Nortons and you want a test ride, you can now order a test ride to be brought to your door from Norton. The 961 Commando is available to be delivered to you at a time and a location that is convenient. So this new test ride to you service covers both the SP and the CR variants, and if you want to book it, you simply head off to the Norton Motorcycles website, where you go to the book a test ride page. The link is up on screen now, and I have to say I do like the looks of the new Norton. I think it's a very handsome machine indeed. If only it wasn't quite so expensive, I might be seriously tempted by one of those, but hey ho, can't have everything. So the initiative is in support of the existing test ride capability, which is available direct from Norton's HQ in Solihull, and hopefully with the engagement of the Indian manufacturer. I'm just trying to remember for the life of me which one it is. The reliability issues and the supply issues have been sorted out. Hopefully Norton will now start to make a serious dent in motorcycle sales. Right, okay, and from Solihull to Sydney, I was out there, as you probably recall, as I've just mentioned. In fact, I took a quick side flight from Sydney out to Geelong to visit Professor Chris Harns, I must remember he's now a professor, lab at Deakin University. Now, you probably know that I've been working alongside him on the Shiny Side Up talks, where Chris has been talking about the star rating scheme for motorcycle clothing, MotoCAP. MotoCAP basically takes bike clothing that's available in Australia and New Zealand, some of which is available here, some of which isn't. But then what they do in the lab is they destruction test things, and they publish the test results along with a simple to understand star rating system. And the good news is that MotoCAP's just published what could be a game-changing document. It's the guide to designing and manufacturing motorcycle protective clothing. If you want to find a copy of it, I'll just put the link up on screen for you. It's available to all clothing manufacturers, as well as you and me, if you want to read it. So whether you are big or small, and whether you make lots of garments or just one or two, wherever you are in the world, you can download this particular guide for free. Now, there is actually a history of sharing best practice when it comes to designing motorcycle clothing, going all the way back to Roderick Wood's research that led to the original UK-based Cambridge standard. But Deakin University have been commissioned by Road Safety Victoria and Transport for New South Wales to produce the new document, which includes updated advice and recommendations. Now, the aim is to help startups and established brands alike design better and safer riding kit, and to do it hopefully at a reasonable price. process. Now, the tests themselves cover not just abrasion and burst resistance and seam strength, but also rider comfort, which is essential in hot climates, of course, and waterproofness, which is pretty useful in the UK. And hopefully we'll get better value and safer clothing out of the guide. For the manufacturers, topics include not just the necessary design parameters, of course, but also advice on managing quality control. Now, this is essential as most manufacturers actually outsource the actual manufacturing to third parties, and they are vulnerable to those subcontractors cutting corners. Now, Professor Hurren is not the only expert behind the guide. Also involved are Dr. Liz Derone. She carried out a fascinating study some years back, which I have talked about in the past, examining exactly how the supposedly protective clothing worn by riders actually failed in real crashes. And Paul Vansbury, who's here today, who is a UK expert on protective clothing and body armour. Now, the stakeholders are from a number of different countries. They were also consulted about their input to the draft too. So if you want to read the guide, it can be downloaded from the link I have popped up on the screen for you today. Okay, now moving on swiftly. There are many elements in the push towards zero emissions, and one way is to use renewable energy sources. I was going to show you a picture of the cover of the book of the guide. Here it is, just quickly, because I completely forgot to run it up there. But that is the cover of the guide from Deakin University there, and the MotoCAP team. Right, so yeah, where was I? So Yamaha. They have announced that they are going to adopt low carbon, also called green aluminium, in the drive towards carbon neutrality. The Japanese bike builder, they began to use it as a raw material for the manufacture of parts back in February last month, and it's claimed that this is a first for Japanese motorcycles, and Yamaha Motor, they say they plan to gradually expand its usage in future models. Now, by using renewable energy sources, the end product is actually manufactured with around 60% less CO2 compared with traditionally refined aluminium, and it'll be phased into the production as supply volumes allow. Now, aluminium parts account for anything between 10 and 30% of the total vehicle weight of a typical motorcycle. So adopting green aluminium is actually a very effective way to reduce the overall carbon footprint resulting from raw material manufacturing and as part of the product's life cycle. Now, Yamaha Motors already use recycled aluminium. Around 80% of the total they build into bikes is recycled, but the use of this green aluminium, which is processed via the renewable energy, will complement this and will be used to manufacture parts that still cannot be manufactured using recycled materials. This is all in line with their environment plan for 2050, where they are aiming to achieve carbon neutrality through all their business activities, including the supply chain. Now, here's something that you probably aren't particularly interested in because it's a car. So what's special about this particular model? Well, the answer is that it's electric, but with a rather unusual battery. It's a sodium-ion battery. It's fitted to this demonstration model of a new car, which is the Hua Xiangqi. I think I've pronounced that vaguely correctly. The battery is said to have a total energy capacity of 25 kilowatt hours, and the vehicle is claimed to be able to travel around 250 kilometers, about 150 miles on a charge. Now, why am I bothering to show you an electric car when you're probably not in the least bit interested in it? Well, basically, it means there could be an a viable alternative to the lithium-ion batteries we're more familiar with. Now, the scarcity and cost of lithium is a growing challenge to the electric vehicle industry, bikes included. And whilst sodium-ion battery technology has been touted as an alternative for a while, this is the first time it's actually been seen in a vehicle. So what's so important about it? Well, sodium-ion batteries, they do have a lower energy density than lithium-ion batteries. So basically, in the same space, you can't store as much energy, but they have advantages, including better low temperature performance, which is a real issue if you live in somewhere like Canada and you're trying to start your electric car in the winter. They charge more quickly than current lithium-ion technology, so lightning motorcycles may have something to say about that, as I mentioned a few shows ago. And they also have a longer life too. They are also less prone to overheating and therefore considered to be safer. Now, right now, 70% of China's lithium has to be imported. China are building huge numbers of electric vehicles generally, and that means that for the rest of us too, there are limited supplies of the metal. And all this has led to increases in the price of lithium-ion batteries. Now, if the project is successful, the lithium-ion battery could allow production of cheaper vehicles. The battery that powers the this particular car, when you attempt to pronounce it again, costs between 30 to 50% less than an equivalent lithium-ion battery with the same energy capacity. And so it's estimated that the overall cost of an electric vehicle could be reduced by as much as 10%. And that's a fairly significant saving, isn't it? So, okay. Finally, what have we got to say here? Some good news from the Motorcycles Union of Ireland, the Ulster Centre, who have released an official statement about the state of road racing in Northern Ireland. So I'll just quote the statement to you. Now, it starts by saying, as most of you will be aware, all tarmac motorcycle racing was cancelled in early February 2023 due to a significant increase in the annual insurance premium. Following the initial decision and listening to the feedback of the racing community, a crowdfundme was set up so racing fans could do their bit to help out. Now, although we know that it was a big ask, we are overwhelmed at the generosity of all who contributed. Combined with this total figure now raised and the determination of MCUI-UC member Mr. Stephen Lyons, who's worked around the clock with our insurers to find a solution, we're now pleased to be able to announce a new insurance quote has been secured, which makes it possible for all clubs to promote their events in 2023. The statement continues. The objective of the crowdfunding was that enough funds would be raised so that all clubs would have the option to promote their events. Figure currently raised combined with a new insurance quote has now made this possible. Thanks to all the efforts of those concerned, the MCUI-UC promoting clubs and members are extremely grateful and humbled by everyone's generosity. As chairman of the MCUI-UC, I pass on sincere thanks on behalf of all promoting club to every single person who donated to the crowdfunding initiative. And he concludes by saying, with the road racing season just around the corner, I'd ask the racing community to continue to support events and make 2023 a year to remember. I have to say I am quite looking forward to catching up with the Northwest 200. It's an event I've never been to. It's one on my bucket list. I'd be sad if I never ever got there and saw it eventually, but certainly I will be enjoying it when it's covered on the box. So that's great news for the Irish road racing scene. Now, I'm going to turn back towards the Shiny Side Up events for my final concluding thoughts today, by asking, could we see something like the Shiny Side Up in the UK? Now, just to remind you, what Shiny Side Up is it's a government-supported initiative which aims to talk to bikers, to get out into the community and to give bikers a chance to meet people from around the world who have some expertise in motorcycling. Personally, I think Shiny Side Up is a brilliant innovation because it actually gets out there and it does meet motorcyclists with the sole aim of actually making them better prepared for the roads. And it brings in what I believe are credible witnesses, if you like, to present the data and the information that help inform New Zealand's riders. Now, I think what's even more impressive is the way that the stories the presenters can tell these riders have actually been chosen to interweave. Now, for example, this year round we had Brittany Morrow. She's been talking about the consequences of a crash that she had at high speed on a motorcycle. She was on the passenger seat when she came off without adequate protection. But this year she put a new spin on her horrific experience to offer advice on sourcing and sizing bike clothing, and specifically something I've never heard explained explicitly before, the need not just to fit a helmet by size but also by shape. And she explained exactly how you can do that, and it's relatively straightforward, very easy. I'm hoping I can get her to appear on an ELEVENSES special soon to cover helmet shape and why it's so important. We also had along as part of the team a crash investigator from the Wellington Police, Sergeant Peter Sauter, and he spent a lot of time going through how information is actually pulled from a bad crash scene to determine what happened. And as he said, his job is not to place blame on anybody, it's to actually find out the facts and determine exactly what happened. The rest of it is unknown to other people. But he also spoke quite openly actually about the psychological impact that he personally had suffered from repeated attendance on fatal crashes. Chris Hurren, now professor, explained how riding kit works in a crash. He gave the lowdown on the latest from the MotoCAP clothing tests, and with more and more CE rated garments headed down under, he's been running them on his Cambridge abrasion test machine. And frankly, the results aren't pretty. His conclusions is that even AAA rated kit may not be protective on the abrasive South Island roads out in New Zealand, and the A rated clothing offers little more than standard denim. Now, one accusation that's been leveled at what he does by the manufacturers is that the test machine is too aggressive. Now, apparently not, because what Chris has done is actually built a portable machine which attaches to a car, and it allows samples of the same clothing that has been bench tested to be dragged along a real road surface. And the test times of the samples run on the Cambridge machine and those abraded actually on the road surface itself are remarkably similar. It would be very interesting to discover how the UK tests the roads would compare in these tests against the Cambridge machine that Chris uses, and stay tuned on that. I will have some information on that in a future show. Now, we also had suspension guru Dave Moss on hand, and he talked about the importance of keeping the bike in tune with the riding we do, and most importantly, he talks about the absolute necessity to alter the ergonomics to make the machine fit the rider, rather than what we normally do, of course, which is get on a bike and then bend ourselves to fit the bike, with the inevitable consequences on reduced control. Personally, I've been talking about the human factor in errors that cause the crashes and collisions that we have so commonly. And I particularly covered this year the concept of situational awareness that's drummed into other operators in high-risk environments like piloting an aircraft, but which is almost completely lacking when we come to talking about excuse me, road safety as an explicit goal in riding. A new presentation on this particular tour excuse me, has been talking about the road to Vision Zero. Now, perhaps not surprisingly, the various presenters who talked about this had a bit of a hard time, but frankly, at the last event, a woman called Tara McMillan not surprisingly, I picked up just a tad of a cold on the way back from sitting on millions of aeroplanes. So, yeah, Tara McMillan, she went out of her way to explain that Vision Zero The approach doesn't mean banning bikes, as many riders seem to suspect it do, but it's actually a multifaceted approach. Now, it ranges from everything from transitioning to a safer motorcycle fleet, ABS and other rider aids stand out here, to improving the infrastructure, which includes wire rope barriers, which I know riders hate, but the evidence is that they actually save lives rather than cause rider injury. And also includes, of course, reducing things like traffic signal violations with red light cameras, something that, again, is a problem for riders. Now, Tara tackled what is really a very tough job. It's very hard to convince bikers around the world that we're actually mostly responsible for our own problems. Well, in fact, she said, and supported it with the data that she has in hand, that what I've been talking about for over 20 years with survival skills, that we tend to crash solo for the majority of our fatalities, or the majority of our injuries result when we fall into the two to tangle avoidable crash. Now, not everything she said was well received, but I would say it was a genuinely grown up conversation for a woman who is herself a new and learning rider. And she didn't treat bikers as the bad boys or and girls of road safety, as we so often are. It really was a very honest appreciation and explanation of the problems we face. So here's the biggie, really. Most cyclists are surprisingly accepting of risk, but they are also convinced that the risk mostly comes from other sources, specifically other road users, and wire rope barriers, of course, and poor surfaces. Now, one question that cropped up fairly frequently, and it was often directed at me in discussion sessions, because I'm an outsider to New Zealand, is how did I find the roads and why are NZ roads so poor? Well, the people who asked that question were genuinely shocked by my answer, because I actually said that aside from roads damaged by the recent heavy rain out there, and also with a nod towards the sections that are resurfaced with loose chipping, which happens in other countries too, and are pretty hazardous for motorcycles if they are not swept up. New Zealand roads are actually pretty damn good. If you're listening to this from New Zealand, you'd be appalled at the road surfaces we encounter every day here in the UK. And if anything, the roads in Los Angeles are even worse right now. Some of the potholes have to be seen to be believed. So could we reach out to bikers with something like Shiny Side Up in the UK? Well, I doubt it, at least not via an official government agency. There are too many layers of bureaucracy, frankly, each of which will have its own agenda to push. And the result would either be no consensus or something totally bland, which defaults to best practice, i.e., what the police say we should be doing. I can't see any place for people like myself who've challenged conventional wisdom. And even if somebody independent, or at least theoretically independent, perhaps the Motorcycle Industry Association, for example, or the new Motorcycle Council, if they put their minds to doing something that actually benefits ordinary bikers rather than themselves, I suspect that they would actually be too bound up with best practice principles, which in reality tends to mean doing things the way they've pretty much always been done. Now, in the UK, better biking content is pretty much owned by the police. They input heavily into what the IAM and ROSPA and the DVSA offer, and I think it seriously misses out on the multi-source approach of Shiny Side Up that happily mixes input from inside and outside the conventional road safety sources, and even goes as far as to bring in knowledge from different countries. I mean, the UK police, I think, and I say this cautiously, have not been entirely accepting of the way that things are done outside the UK. Now, the closest comparison I can think of to Shiny Side Up is probably Biker Down, which I'm proud to say, of course, I was involved in right from the very first pilot course. That was with Kent Fire and Rescue back in 2011, all the way up to the final event I presented in February 2020, by which time the course had really become a national success. It was presented by many of the UK's fire services and has even spread abroad to Canada. Now, I contributed, as you probably know, the Science Being Seen module to that, and I was one of the team that won a Prince of Michael Road Safety Award in 2012. So, yes, I am rightly, I think, proud of our achievements for Biker Down. It's free, it offers valuable advice, and by incorporating Science Being Seen, I believe that it looked outside the box in a way to try to understand junction collisions. And essentially, it was seeking to educate riders to understand why these crashes happen, rather than repeating the all too common treat everyone else on the roads as if they're out to kill you advice, which really doesn't help. And certainly doesn't put riders into a helpful state of mind either. Now, Science Being Seen remains the source material to the current Thinking Biker module, even if I'm not credited, which is a slight frustration. But beyond Biker Down, well, I don't really see anything like Shiny Side Up happening over here. It would be probably difficult to organise. As I've explained, if we get an audience of 250 in a show out in New Zealand, that's equivalent to 2,500 in the UK, because we have around 10 times as many bikers on the road. So we would need some big auditoriums. But frankly, there's no reason that we as individuals can't use the shiny side up principles to educate ourselves. All right, so that is it for today. Kevin mentions that the roads in New Zealand are better than Manchester. Yes, I would agree. Although I didn't find them too awful. If you really want some bad roads, come and pop down to London and I'll take you on some. But anyway, we can always argue about who's got the worst roads. But genuinely, I do think that New Zealanders do have better roads than they realise. Anyway, that's it for today. The next show will be going out live Wednesday, 22nd of March at 11 a.m, at which time I should hopefully have recovered from my slight sniffle and got over the jet lag. But until then, thank you very much indeed for tuning in. It's good to be back live, and it's good to have a live audience once again. So until next show, if you are out there on your bike today, and it does look like it's clearing up a bit at the moment, enjoy your ride, but make sure that you stay shiny side up.